The first gunshot split the air like thunder on an otherwise peaceful summer morning in Bannack, Montana Territory, 1865. Juliana Lockhart knew then that her life would never be the same. She clutched her swollen belly as she ran, her breath coming in panicked gasps, the pain of early labor threatening to bring her to her knees with each desperate step away from the men who had murdered her husband. 2 days later, hidden in an abandoned trapper's cabin deep in the foothills, Juliana gave birth alone to twins, a boy and a girl with matching tufts of auburn hair and the same piercing blue eyes as their father. As she gazed down at their innocent faces, tears streaming down her cheeks, she whispered, "Your papa would have loved you so much." She named them Samuel and Sarah, the names she and David had chosen together during those quiet evenings when they'd planned their future, a future now shattered by a single bullet. When her milk came in and her strength returned enough to travel, Juliana wrapped her babies against her chest and made the arduous journey back toward civilization. She knew she couldn't return to Bannack not with the men who had killed David still there, likely searching for her. Instead, she headed for Silver Creek, a smaller settlement about 30 miles east. Silver Creek was little more than a cluster of wooden buildings along the stagecoach route, but it had a general store, a saloon, and most importantly, people who might help a widow with infant twins. As Juliana approached the town, she rehearsed her story. She would be a widow traveling west who had lost her husband to fever. No one needed to know the truth that David had been shot in cold blood for the gold he'd found, gold that was rightfully his. The first few days in Silver Creek brought temporary relief. The owner of the modest boarding house, Mrs. Patterson, took pity on Juliana and allowed her to stay in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning. But even with the twins barely a week old, rumors began to spread, whispers about a woman from Bannack, whose husband had been involved with claim jumping, speculation that the babies were not fathered by the same man, suspicions that Juliana herself was somehow involved in criminal activities. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lockhart," Mrs. Patterson said stiffly one morning, avoiding Juliana's eyes, "but I can't have your kind staying here. It's bad for business. You'll need to find other accommodations by sundown." "My kind," Juliana repeated, incredulous. "I'm a widow with infant twins." "What exactly do you mean by my kind? There's talk about your husband's death, about those babies." The older woman glanced at the cradle where Samuel and Sarah slept peacefully. "People are saying things." "What people? Saying what things?" Juliana demanded. "That your husband was killed for good reason, that those twins might not be his." Mrs. Patterson's mouth pinched. "I don't need that sort of scandal under my roof." By midday, the general store owner refused to sell to her. By afternoon, the town doctor declined to see the twins for their first checkup. By dusk, Juliana understood with crushing clarity that Silver Creek would offer no sanctuary. She spent that night in the livery stable, the twins nestled against her chest, her mind racing with desperate plans. In the morning, she would try to find passage on the stage heading west. Perhaps in a larger town, a place where no one knew her name or had heard the cruel rumors, she might find a new start. Dawn broke clear and cold, and Juliana was awakened by the stable boy's startled cry when he discovered her huddled in a stall. "You can't be in here, madam," he stammered. "Mr. Hutchins'll have my hide." "I'm leaving," Juliana assured him, gathering her meager belongings and soothing Sarah, who had begun to whimper. "Is the stagecoach running today?" The boy shook his head. "Not till tomorrow. Bridge washed out with yesterday's rain. They're fixing it now." Another night without shelter loomed before her. Juliana felt tears stinging her eyes but blinked them back fiercely. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't afford the luxury of self-pity. Her babies needed her to be strong. She spent the morning on the edge of town, nursing the twins in turn and attempting to plan her next move. Around noon, hunger drove her to approach the back door of the town's only restaurant. The cook, a heavy-set woman with gray, streaked hair, took one look at the babies and shook her head. "Can't help you," she said, but her eyes showed a flicker of sympathy. "Owner said no handouts to you specifically." She hesitated, then quickly pressed half a loaf of bread into Juliana's hands. "Best I can do. Now go on before someone sees." Juliana accepted the bread with murmured thanks and retreated to a small copse of trees near the creek that gave the town its name. As she sat on a fallen log, tearing small pieces of bread to eat, she heard the approach of horses. 4 riders came into view, and Juliana's blood ran cold. She recognized 2 of them. They had been with the men who shot David. They were looking for her, just as she had feared. They must have followed her trail from Bannack to Silver Creek. With trembling hands, Juliana gathered the twins and slipped deeper into the trees. She couldn't go back to town. No one would help her there. Her only hope was to follow the creek bed and pray she could find somewhere to hide before they picked up her trail again. For 3 days, Juliana traveled, keeping to the creek when possible, venturing into the wilderness when necessary. The twins cried often, hungry and uncomfortable. Juliana's own body was failing her. Her milk was diminishing from lack of proper food and water, and exhaustion made every step a battle. On the 4th day, she stumbled upon a small farmstead nestled in a valley. Smoke curled from the chimney of a modest cabin, and a few chickens scratched in a small yard. A vegetable garden stretched along one side, and beyond it, a corral held 2 horses. Juliana approached cautiously. She had learned the hard way that not all who appeared civilized were kind. But desperation drove her forward. The twins needed shelter, food, care she could no longer provide alone. She was halfway to the cabin when the door opened and a woman stepped out, rifle in hand. "That's far enough," the woman called. She was older, perhaps 50, with a weathered face and gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Juliana stopped, swaying slightly on her feet. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "My babies need help. I can work, I can cook, clean, tend garden. Anything." The woman studied her for a long moment, then lowered the rifle slightly. "Those yours?" she asked, nodding at the bundles against Juliana's chest. "Yes, twins. They're just 2 weeks old." Something in the woman's expression softened. "Where's their father?" "Dead," Juliana answered, her voice flat. "Murdered for his gold claim." The woman sighed heavily. "I'm Martha Simmons. My husband Peter's out with the cattle. Come inside before you fall down." Martha fed Juliana hot stew and cornbread, helped her bathe the twins, and gave her clean clothes. When Peter returned at dusk, he accepted Martha's decision to let them stay without comment. For a week, Juliana regained her strength at the Simmons farm. The couple was childless, and Martha seemed to take genuine pleasure in helping with the twins. But even in this remote place, trouble found her. A neighbor stopped by with news from town men were asking about a woman with twin babies, offering a reward for information. The description matched Juliana exactly. "You're in some kind of trouble, girl," Peter said that evening. "Those men aren't looking to help you." "They killed my husband," Juliana admitted. "They think I know where he hid his gold." "Do you?" Martha asked bluntly. Juliana shook her head. "No, David never told me. He said it was safer that way." Peter and Martha exchanged glances. "You can't stay here," Peter said finally. "Those men have connections all through the territory. They'll find you eventually." "Where can I go?" Juliana asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "West," Peter answered. "Keep going west. There's a place called Juniper Springs, about 60 miles from here." Small ranch town, but decent folks. My brother Tom has a freight business there. I'll write you a letter to take to him." The next morning, Peter saddled their extra horse and fixed a makeshift carrier that would allow Juliana to keep the twins secure while riding. Martha packed food, clean cloths for the babies, and a small pouch of coins. "It's not much," Martha said, pressing the money into Juliana's hand. "But it might help you get started somewhere new." With directions to Juniper Springs and the precious letter to Peter's brother, Juliana set out once more. The journey was slow and difficult. The twins were fussy. The weather turned hot, and twice Juliana had to hide in the brush when riders approached on the trail. 5 days later, she crested a hill and saw Juniper Springs spread out below her, a collection of buildings larger than Silver Creek, but smaller than Bannack had been. A creek wound through the town, and beyond it, ranchland stretched toward distant mountains. Juliana approached cautiously, leading the horse. The twins were quiet for once, sleeping in their carrier. Her clothes were dusty, her face sunburned, but she held her head high as she entered the town. She found Simmons Freight and Shipping at the far end of the main street, a large barn with wagons in various states of repair outside, and a small office attached. A man who looked remarkably like Peter Simmons was examining the wheel of a freight wagon. "Mr. Thomas Simmons," Juliana called. The man looked up, squinting against the sun. "That's me." "I have a letter from your brother," Juliana said, reaching into her pocket for the folded paper. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag and approached, taking the letter with a curious expression. As he read, his face grew serious. "You're the widow," he said finally, "with the twins." "Yes, sir, Juliana Lockhart." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the office. "Come inside. Let's talk." The interior was sparsely furnished: a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves filled with ledgers. Thomas gestured for Juliana to sit, then leaned against the desk. "Peter says you need a safe place. Says there are men after you." "Yes." "Why?" Juliana hesitated, but decided the truth was her only option. "My husband found gold, a lot of it. He was going to register the claim properly, but before he could, men jumped him. Shot him dead right in front of me." She swallowed hard. "I was already in labor when it happened. I ran. Had the twins alone in a cabin up in the hills." Thomas whistled softly. "And these men think you know where the gold is?" "Yes, but I don't. David never told me the exact location." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "Well, I can give you work in the office here. Not much pay, but there's a room in back you and the little ones can use." "It's not much, but it's private." Relief washed over Juliana. "Thank you, I'm grateful for any help." "Don't thank me yet," Thomas warned. "Those men sound persistent. They might track you here eventually." "I know," Juliana acknowledged, "but I need time. Time to figure out what to do next." That evening, settled in the small room behind the freight office with the twins fed and sleeping, Juliana allowed herself to think beyond immediate survival for the first time in weeks. She needed to establish herself here, earn money, build connections. She needed to create a life where her children could be safe. The next morning, Thomas introduced her to the town's general store owner, a widow named Mrs. Henderson, who agreed to extend credit for basic necessities. By afternoon, Juliana had cleaned the freight office from top to bottom and organized the chaotic ledgers into a system that actually made sense. "You've got a head for numbers," Thomas observed, reviewing her work. "That'll come in handy." Days passed, then weeks. Juliana settled into a routine, working at the freight office during the day with the twins nearby in a cradle Thomas had commissioned from the local carpenter, returning to her small room at night. She was careful, always watching for strangers, always alert for danger. But as summer turned to autumn, she began to hope that perhaps the men had given up their search. That hope was shattered on a crisp October morning when a stranger rode into town. Juliana was at the general store when she heard the distinctive sound of his horse's hooves on the packed dirt of the main street. Something about the rhythm made her look up, and her heart nearly stopped. She recognized him immediately, one of the men who had been with the group that killed David. Older than the others, with a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jawline. He dismounted in front of the saloon across the street, tying his horse to the hitching post with deliberate movements. Juliana stepped back from the store window, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Henderson noticed her distress. "You look like you've seen a ghost, dear," the older woman said. "Is everything all right?" "I need to go," Juliana whispered. "Now, please, is there a back way out?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed with concern, but she asked no questions. "Through the storeroom. It leads to the alley." Juliana hurried back to the freight office, took the twins from their cradle, and was packing her few belongings when Thomas entered. "What's happened?" he asked, taking in the scene with a frown. "One of them is here," Juliana explained, her voice shaking. "One of the men who killed David. I need to leave before he sees me." Thomas moved to the window, peering out carefully. "The fellow with the scar." "Yes." Thomas stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Running might not be your best option this time." "What do you mean?" "You've been running for months now. How long can you keep going with 2 babies? Winter's coming on. It's no time to be on the road with little ones." "But if he finds me, if he finds an empty room and you gone, he'll know you were here. The hunt will continue." Thomas turned to face her. "But if you stay, if you face this head-on, maybe we can find a more permanent solution." "What kind of solution?" Juliana asked skeptically. Before Thomas could answer, the door to the freight office opened. Both turned, expecting the scarred man, but instead a tall figure in a dusty black hat stood in the doorway. "Tom," the newcomer greeted, nodding to Thomas. "Got that shipment of harnesses you were expecting?" "Finnian," Thomas replied. "Good timing. Come in and close the door." The man stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years outdoors. His eyes, a striking shade of green, moved from Thomas to Juliana, lingering on the babies in her arms. "Finn, this is Juliana Lockhart and her twins," Thomas said. "Juliana, this is Finnian Foster. Owns the Diamond F Ranch south of town." Finnian nodded politely. "Madam." "Finn, we've got a situation," Thomas continued. "Mrs. Lockhart is being pursued by some dangerous men. One of them just rode into town." Finnian's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, becoming more alert. "What kind of dangerous?" "The kind that murdered her husband and would think nothing of harming a woman and her babies," Thomas replied grimly. Finnian studied Juliana more carefully. "These men, what do they want?" "Gold," Juliana answered. "My husband found a rich vein. They killed him for it, and they think I know where it is." "Do you?" "No, but they won't believe that." Finnian was quiet for a moment, then turned to Thomas. "What's your plan?" Thomas sighed. "That's what we were discussing when you walked in. My first thought was to have Sheriff Miller arrest the fellow, but on what charge? We have no proof he's done anything illegal. And if he's arrested, his friends will just come looking," Finnian added. "Exactly." Thomas glanced at Juliana. "Which is why I was thinking maybe we need to be more creative in our approach." "Creative how?" Juliana asked. Thomas looked at Finnian. "What would those men do if they believed Mrs. Lockhart was under the protection of one of the most respected ranchers in the territory?" Finnian's eyebrows rose slightly. "You suggesting what I think you're suggesting could work," Thomas said with a shrug. "They're looking for a vulnerable widow. If they instead find a woman with a husband and powerful connections, they might decide the risk isn't worth it." "A husband?" Juliana repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" He's suggesting we pretend to be married, Finnian clarified, his tone neutral, to discourage these men from bothering you. Juliana stared at him, then at Thomas. That's absurd. They won't believe it. They might, Thomas countered. If we do it right. I don't even know him, Juliana protested, gesturing at Finnian. Which is why we'd need to be convincing, Finnian said, his voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. It would mean you and the twins coming to stay at my ranch, being seen together in town. Acting like a family. For how long? Juliana demanded. Until these men give up and move on, Thomas answered. Or until we find a more permanent solution. Juliana looked at Finnian more carefully. He was older than her, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard work. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "Why would you agree to this?" she asked him directly. "You don't know me. I could bring nothing but trouble to your door." Something flickered in Finnian's green eyes, an emotion Juliana couldn't quite identify. "I have my reasons," he said simply. "Finn lost his wife and daughter to fever 5 years back," Thomas explained quietly. "He knows something about grief and starting over." Finnian shot Thomas a sharp look, as if displeased by the revelation of personal information, but he didn't deny it. Sarah chose that moment to wake, her tiny cries filling the room. Juliana shifted her weight, trying to soothe the baby while still holding Samuel. Without a word, Finnian stepped forward, reaching for Samuel. "May I?" Surprised, Juliana hesitated, then carefully transferred her son into the rancher's strong arms. Finnian held the baby with surprising ease, cradling him securely against his chest. "He's a fine boy," Finnian said softly, looking down at Samuel's face. "Strong." Something about seeing this tall, weathered man holding her son with such gentle confidence made Juliana's resistance waver. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of her grief and fear, responsible for 2 helpless lives besides her own. The thought of having someone to share that burden, even temporarily, was almost overwhelming. "If I agreed," she said slowly, "it would be only until the danger passes. And I would want to contribute to earn my keep." Finnian looked up from Samuel's face. "I wouldn't expect anything less. My ranch needs a woman's touch," he continued. "Has for years. The house is solid but sparse. The garden's gone wild. And my housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, is getting on in years. She'd welcome the help, I expect." "And the twins?" Juliana asked. "Would they be a burden?" A shadow passed over Finnian's face. "No, madam, they would not." He looked down at Samuel again. "Children are a blessing, not a burden." Thomas cleared his throat. "If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. That fellow might be asking questions in town already." "I'll take Mrs. Lockhart and the twins out to the ranch now," Finnian decided. "My wagon's out back. We can load her things and be gone before anyone's the wiser." "And when people ask questions," Juliana pressed. "What story do we tell?" "The simplest one," Thomas suggested. "That you were recently widowed and came west to stay with family me. That you and Finn met. There was an understanding and you married quietly before moving to the ranch." "People will gossip about the speed of it," Finnian acknowledged. "But they'll gossip more if a single woman moves out to a bachelor's ranch. Lesser of 2 evils." Juliana looked down at Sarah, now quieted against her shoulder, then at Samuel in Finnian's arms. She thought of David, of the future they had planned together, of the love they had shared. What would he want for her now? For their children, all right, she said finally. "Let's try your plan, Mr. Foster." "Finnian," he corrected gently. "Or Finn. If we're to be husband and wife, even in pretense, you should use my given name." Within an hour, Juliana and the twins were settled in Finnian's wagon, her few possessions packed in a trunk. Thomas had gone to spread the news of the marriage discreetly, starting with Mrs. Henderson at the general store, knowing the information would travel quickly. As they drove out of town, Juliana kept her head down, a shawl covering her distinctive red hair. The twins were tucked securely beside her, sleeping peacefully despite the wagon's movement. "The ranch is about 5 miles south," Finnian explained as they left the town behind. "Good land, well watered. I run about 500 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. Have you lived there long?" Juliana asked, trying to learn more about this man who was now, at least in the eyes of the town, her husband. 10 years. Came west from Pennsylvania after the war, bought the land when it was nothing but wild grass and a falling-down cabin. His hands were steady on the reins, his posture relaxed but vigilant. Built it up piece by piece. "The war?" Juliana questioned. "You fought Union cavalry," Finnian confirmed. "Wasn't much older than a boy when I joined up. Saw things no man should see." He glanced at her. "Your husband?" David was exempt. His father was ill, and he was the only son. She looked down at the twins. He always felt guilty about not serving, though he did his part supporting the cause in other ways. They fell into silence as the wagon climbed a gentle rise. When they reached the top, Finnian stopped the horses. "There it is," he said, nodding ahead. "Diamond F." Below them stretched a valley cradled by rolling hills. A creek wound through the center, bordered by cottonwoods now golden with autumn. Near the creek stood a substantial log house, much larger than Juliana had expected. Beyond it were several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cattle grazed in the distance, and horses moved in a fenced pasture near the house. "It's beautiful," Juliana said sincerely. "It's home," Finnian replied simply and snapped the reins to set the horses moving again. As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch, short, plump, with gray hair and a wary expression. Behind her came a young man, perhaps 17, lanky and curious. "That's Mrs. Wilkins," Finnian explained, "and her son Jacob. They live in the small cabin behind the main house. She keeps house, he helps with the ranch work." When the wagon stopped in front of the house, Finnian jumped down and moved to help Juliana. His hands were strong and sure as he lifted her to the ground, and for a moment they stood closer than was strictly necessary. Juliana felt a surprising flutter in her chest at his proximity. "Mrs. Wilkins," Finnian called, stepping back. "Come meet my wife." The housekeeper's expression was a study in shock. "Your what?" "My wife," Finnian repeated calmly. "Mrs. Juliana Foster, and our children, Samuel and Sarah." Mrs. Wilkins approached slowly, her eyes moving from Juliana to the babies to Finnian with open disbelief. "When exactly did you acquire a wife and 2 infants, Mr. Foster?" she asked, her tone making it clear she wasn't fooled. "Recently," Finnian answered, his voice firm. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd make them welcome." To Juliana's surprise, Mrs. Wilkins' expression softened as she looked at the twins. "Baby's in the house again," she murmured. "Never thought I'd see the day." She met Juliana's eyes. "Well, come inside, Mrs. Foster. You must be tired from your journey." The interior of the house was just as Finnian had described it, solidly built, but sparsely furnished. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end. A hallway led to what Juliana presumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but austere, lacking the touches that made a house feel like a home. "Jacob, bring in Mrs. Foster's trunk," Mrs. Wilkins instructed her son, who had been hovering in the doorway. "Mr. Foster, I suppose you'll be wanting the master bedroom prepared for your wife." "Yes," Finnian confirmed, "and we'll need to set up something for the twins. Perhaps that old cradle in the attic," Mrs. Wilkins nodded. "I'll see to it." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, Mr. Foster, but I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I, Mrs. Wilkins," Finnian replied. "So do I." That evening, after Mrs. Wilkins had prepared a simple but hearty dinner and retired to her cabin with Jacob, Juliana sat by the fire with the twins sleeping nearby in the cradle that had been brought down from the attic. Finnian entered from outside, having checked on the livestock one final time. "Mrs. Wilkins doesn't believe our story," Juliana observed as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. "No," Finnian agreed, settling into a chair across from her, "but she won't contradict it to others. She's loyal." "Why is she so loyal to you?" Finnian was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Her husband worked for me when I first bought this place. Good man. Was killed in a stampede 3 years ago. I've kept her and Jacob on ever since, made sure they wanted for nothing." "That was kind of you." "It was right," Finnian corrected. "That's all." Juliana studied his profile, outlined by the firelight. There was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring, a solid quality that suggested reliability and strength of character. "You should know," she said softly, "that I don't expect our arrangement to be complete." Finnian turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised questioningly. "I mean," Juliana clarified, feeling her cheeks warm, "that while I am grateful for your protection and willing to play the role of wife in public, I don't expect or want the physical aspects of marriage." Understanding dawned in Finnian's eyes. "I would never presume such a thing, Mrs. Lockhart." "Foster," she corrected gently. "If we're to be convincing, I should be Mrs. Foster even when we're alone. We don't know who might be listening." A small smile curved his mouth. "Very practical of you." "I've had to become practical," Juliana replied. "Survival requires it." Finnian nodded. "Well then, Mrs. Foster, I should show you to your room. You must be tired." He led her down the hallway to a large bedroom at the back of the house. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, with a chest of drawers against one wall and a small writing desk beneath the window. This was. Juliana began, then stopped, unsure if she should mention his late wife. "Yes," Finnian confirmed, "but it's yours now. I've moved my things to the small room across the hall." "I can't take your bedroom." "You can and you will," Finnian insisted. "It's the only one large enough for you and the twins to be comfortable." Juliana wanted to argue further but was too exhausted. "Thank you," she said instead. Finnian nodded, his hand on the door frame. "Sleep well, Mrs. Foster. Tomorrow we can discuss how to make this arrangement work for both of us." The next morning, Juliana woke to the sounds of activity in the kitchen. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered where she was in Finnian Foster's house, pretending to be his wife. The twins were still sleeping, a rare blessing that allowed her to dress quickly and investigate the sounds. She found Mrs. Wilkins at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. Finnian was nowhere in sight. "Good morning," Juliana greeted, moving to help. "May I do something?" Mrs. Wilkins glanced at her. "Coffee's ready if you want to pour. Mr. Foster takes his black." Juliana found cups in a cupboard and filled 3. "Is Mr. Foster outside already?" "Been up since before dawn," Mrs. Wilkins confirmed. "Always is. Some cattle broke through the north fence yesterday. He and Jacob went to fix it." As Juliana set the table, she felt Mrs. Wilkins watching her. Finally, the older woman spoke. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, Mrs. Foster, if that's really your name, but I hope you don't bring harm to this house." Juliana met the housekeeper's gaze directly. "I would never intentionally bring harm to anyone who has shown me kindness, Mrs. Wilkins. HMPH." The woman turned back to the stove. "Mr. Foster's had enough grief in his life. He doesn't need more." "I understand," Juliana said softly. "And I am truly grateful for his help." Mrs. Wilkins seemed about to say more when the twins' cries sounded from the bedroom. Juliana hurried to attend to them, bringing them both to the kitchen once they were changed and settled. She was feeding Samuel while Sarah lay contentedly in the cradle when Finnian returned, bringing the crisp scent of autumn air with him. He removed his hat and gloves, nodding to both women. "Fence is fixed," he announced. "For now, at least." His eyes moved to Juliana and Samuel, something wistful crossing his features before he masked it. "How did you sleep?" he asked, accepting the coffee she had poured. "Well, thank you," Juliana replied. "And you?" "Fine." He took a seat at the table, accepting the plate Mrs. Wilkins set before him. "I was thinking we should ride into town today, the four of us, be seen together, start establishing our story." Juliana tensed. "Is that wise, if that man is still there?" "That's precisely why we should go," Finnian explained. "If we hide away, it looks suspicious. Better to face this head-on, establish our presence as a family." "Mr. Foster's right," Mrs. Wilkins interjected, surprising Juliana. "Nothing feeds gossip like secrecy. You show yourselves as a proper family and people will accept what they see." Juliana looked down at Samuel, considering the risk. "I suppose you're right, but I'm afraid." "I won't let anything happen to you or the children," Finnian promised, his voice low and sincere. "You have my word on that." Something in his tone made Juliana believe him. "All right. We'll go to town." After breakfast, Mrs. Wilkins helped Juliana prepare the twins for the journey while Finnian readied the wagon. When they were all settled, Juliana and the babies in the wagon bed with Mrs. Wilkins, Finnian driving, they set off for Juniper Springs. The town was busy when they arrived, Saturday being a popular day for ranchers and their families to come in for supplies. Finnian parked the wagon in front of the general store and helped Juliana down, his hand lingering on her waist in a convincingly husbandly manner. "Remember," he murmured as they walked toward the store, the twins in Juliana's arms, "were happily married. You came west to stay with Thomas after your first husband died. We met, there was an understanding, and we married quickly." "Yes, I remember," Juliana whispered back. Inside the store, Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up at the sight of them. "Well, Mrs. Lockhart, or should I say Mrs. Foster, Thomas told me the news, but I scarcely believed it." "It happened rather quickly," Juliana admitted, aware of other customers listening intently. "But when you know something is right." "Indeed." Mrs. Henderson's gaze moved to Finnian, who was standing protectively close to Juliana. "And these little ones seem to have taken to their new father." Finnian smiled, reaching out to stroke Samuel's cheek. "They're fine children. I'm blessed to call them mine." The conviction in his voice surprised Juliana. He was playing his role perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. She reminded herself that this was all pretense, an arrangement of convenience and protection. They spent an hour in town, visiting the general store, the post office, and finally stopping at the small cafe for lunch. Throughout, Finnian was attentive and affectionate in a restrained, proper way, helping Juliana in and out of the wagon, carrying Sarah while Juliana carried Samuel, his hand occasionally resting on the small of her back. Juliana found herself responding naturally to his attentions, smiling up at him when he made a quiet joke, leaning slightly into his touch. It was easy, almost too easy, to pretend they were truly a family. They were finishing their meal when the cafe door opened and a man entered, the scarred man Juliana had seen the day before. She froze, her hand tightening on her fork. Finnian noticed immediately, his gaze following hers to the newcomer. "Is that him?" he asked softly. Juliana nodded, unable to speak. "Stay calm," Finnian advised, covering her hand with his own. "Let me handle this." The scarred man approached their table, his cold eyes moving from Finnian to Juliana to the twins. "Foster," he greeted Finnian, apparently recognizing him by reputation. Heard you got yourself a family." "That's right," Finnian replied evenly. "My wife, Juliana, and our children." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied Juliana more carefully. "Have we met before, madam? You look familiar." Juliana forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I don't believe so. I only arrived in the territory recently." "From where?" "Back east," she answered vaguely. "After my first husband died." "First husband," the man repeated, his tone skeptical. "What was his name?" Before Juliana could respond, Finnian cut in smoothly. "I don't see how that's any business of yours, mister. My wife has endured enough grief without being interrogated by strangers." The man's hand moved to rest near his gun, not a direct threat, but a reminder of its presence. "Just making conversation, Foster. No need to get riled." "Well, we were just finishing our meal," Finnian replied, his voice pleasant but his eyes hard. "If you'll excuse us." He stood, helping Juliana up with a gentle hand. Mrs. Wilkins, who had been sitting silently through the exchange, gathered Sarah while Juliana took Samuel. As they moved to leave, the scarred man stepped slightly into their path. "One more thing," he said, his voice lowered. "I'm looking for a woman, red-headed like your wife, had twins about 2 months back. Her husband was killed near Bannack, name of Lockhart. You heard anything about her?" Juliana's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it, but Finnian's expression remained impassive. "Can't say that I have," he replied. "Bannack's a fair distance from here. Why are you looking for this woman?" "Family matter," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Inheritance to be settled." "Well, good luck finding her," Finnian said, gently guiding Juliana past the man toward the door. Outside, Finnian helped them quickly into the wagon. His movements were calm, unhurried, but Juliana could sense the tension in him. "He knows," she whispered as Finnian climbed up to take the reins. "He recognized me." "Maybe," Finnian acknowledged, "but he can't be certain, and he can't do anything in the middle of town in broad daylight." They drove home in silence, Juliana constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting to see the scarred man following. But the road behind them remained empty all the way to the Diamond F. That evening, after Mrs. Wilkins had gone to her cabin and the twins were asleep, Juliana paced the main room while Finnian cleaned his rifle at the table. "He'll come here," she said, voicing the fear that had been building all afternoon. "He'll come for me, for the twins." "Probably," Finnian agreed, his voice matter of fact. "But he won't come alone, and he won't come without making sure first." "How can you be so calm about this?" Finnian set the rifle aside and looked up at her. "Because fear doesn't help, planning does." "What's your plan, then?" Juliana demanded. "First, we make sure you're never alone. Either Mrs. Wilkins, Jacob, or I will be with you at all times." He stood, moving to stand in front of her, stopping her pacing with gentle hands on her shoulders. "Second, we spread the word about anyone suspicious asking questions or lurking around. Make it known throughout the community." Juliana looked up into his face, finding surprising comfort in the steady green of his eyes. "And third, we live our lives," Finnian said simply. "We don't hide. We don't cower, we go about our business as the family we're pretending to be." "That's it, that's your plan, just live." Juliana couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "For now," Finnian confirmed, "while we watch and wait. For what? For them to make a mistake." His hands slid from her shoulders, and Juliana was surprised to find she missed their warmth. "They will, eventually. Men like that always do." The next few days passed in a strange mix of tension and domesticity. True to his word, Finnian ensured Juliana was never alone. When he had to work the far pastures, Mrs. Wilkins stayed close, and Jacob kept watch from the barn or corral. Juliana threw herself into making the house more comfortable. setting up a proper nursery for the twins in a small room off the master bedroom, organizing the kitchen to her liking, planting fall vegetables in the neglected garden. The physical work helped distract her from constant fear, and there was satisfaction in seeing the house slowly transform under her care. She and Finnian settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. In the mornings, they would have breakfast together before he went out to work the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. He would ask about the twins, listen attentively to her descriptions of their small developments, occasionally offer to hold one or both while she rested. A week after their confrontation in town, Finnian announced at breakfast that they had been invited to Sunday dinner at the home of his nearest neighbors, the Carlsons. It would be good to accept, he suggested. The more people who see us as a family, the better. Juliana agreed, though the prospect of an entire afternoon of pretense made her nervous. On Sunday, she dressed with particular care in her best dress, a dark blue calico that brought out the blue of her eyes. She arranged her hair neatly, pinning it back with combs Mrs. Wilkins had lent her. When she emerged from the bedroom with the twins freshly dressed, she found Finnian waiting in the main room. He had trimmed his beard and wore a clean white shirt with his usual dark trousers. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her cheeks warm. "You look very nice, Mrs. Foster," he said softly. "Thank you," Juliana replied, surprised by how pleased his simple compliment made her feel. "So do you." The Carlson farm was about 3 miles from the Diamond F, a prosperous spread with an orchard and extensive gardens besides the usual cattle operation. The family consisted of John and Margaret Carlson, their grown son William, his wife Louise, and their 3 children. They were welcomed warmly, with Margaret Carlson immediately cooing over the twins while Louise peppered Juliana with questions about their whirlwind romance. "It must have been love at first sight," Louise suggested, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Thomas Simmons told us you were only in town a few weeks before the wedding." "Sometimes," Juliana said carefully, "the heart knows what it wants very quickly." "And Finn's been alone too long," Margaret added, bouncing Sarah on her knee. "We all thought he'd never marry again after Elizabeth and little Mary died." "Mother," William warned, glancing at Finnian, who had stiffened slightly at the mention of his first wife and daughter. "It's all right," Finnian said, though his voice was tight. "It's no secret." Juliana reached out impulsively and took his hand. The gesture was meant for their audience, but the gratitude in Finnian's eyes seemed genuine. Throughout dinner, Juliana observed how Finnian interacted with the Carlsons. They clearly respected him, valued his opinion on matters ranging from cattle prices to territorial politics. He was more talkative in their company than he was at home, smiling more often, occasionally even laughing at John Carlson's dry humor. As they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled Juliana aside while Finnian helped John with a stubborn harness on their wagon. "I'm glad Finn found you," the older woman said, her voice low. "After he lost Elizabeth and Mary, we worried about him. He withdrew into himself, worked from dawn to dusk, hardly spoke to anyone unless it was about ranch business." "He's a good man," Juliana replied, feeling oddly defensive of Finnian even though she had known him such a short time. "The best," Margaret agreed. "And those babies of yours, well, it does my heart good to see him with children again. He was such a devoted father to little Mary." On the drive home, with the twins sleeping in Juliana's lap and twilight softening the landscape, Finnian was quiet. Juliana sensed he was thinking about his first family, and she hesitated to intrude on his memories. Finally, as the lights of the Diamond F came into view, she spoke. "Thank you for today. The Carlsons are lovely people." "They are," Finnian agreed. They were good friends to me after. After I was alone, Juliana gathered her courage. Would it help to talk about them, your wife and daughter? Finnian's hands tightened on the reins, then relaxed. Maybe, someday, not tonight. Whenever you're ready, Juliana said softly. I'm a good listener. He glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. Thank you. That night, lying in bed with the twins sleeping nearby, Juliana found herself thinking about Finnian more than about the danger that still threatened them. She wondered what kind of husband he had been to Elizabeth, what kind of father to Mary. She thought about how gentle his hands were when he held Samuel or Sarah, how his face softened when they grasped his fingers or smiled up at him. She wondered, too, about the growing warmth she felt in his presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man himself. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Too soon after David, too complicated with the pretense of their marriage, too dangerous with unknown threats still lurking. But in the darkness of the bedroom that had once been his, surrounded by the faint scent of him that lingered on the quilt, Juliana admitted to herself that she was beginning to care for Finnian Foster in a way that went beyond their arrangement. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost painting the grass silver and the distant mountains sharp against the blue sky. Juliana was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Finnian came in from his early morning chores. "Rider coming," he announced, removing his hat and gloves. "Thomas Simmons." Juliana looked up from the stove, alarm tightening her chest. "Is something wrong? Don't know yet." Finnian moved to the window, watching as Thomas's horse approached. "But he's riding hard." Minutes later, Thomas was seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming his hands. His face was grim. "That man, the one with the scar, he's been asking all over town about you," Thomas said without preamble. "And he's not alone anymore. 2 more men rode in yesterday, mean-looking fellows. They're staying at the hotel." Finnian's expression remained calm, but Juliana saw his jaw tighten. "Have they made any direct threats?" "Not yet. But they've been drinking heavily at the saloon, bragging about some big score they're about to make, and they keep mentioning Bannack." Juliana sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "They're going to come here." "Probably," Thomas agreed. "Sheriff Miller's keeping an eye on them, but he can't arrest them for drinking and talking." Finnian was silent for a moment, his mind clearly working through options. "Mrs. Wilkins," he called, and the housekeeper appeared from the pantry where she had been discreetly listening. "I want you and Jacob to take the wagon and go visit your sister in Helena for a while." "Mr. Foster," Mrs. Wilkins began to protest. "Please," Finnian cut her off. "I don't want you and Jacob caught in the middle of this. It could get dangerous." The housekeeper looked from Finnian to Juliana to the twins, who were contentedly playing on a blanket near the fire. Her expression softened. "All right, we'll go, but you be careful, you hear me?" After Mrs. Wilkins had gone to pack, Thomas leaned forward. "What's your plan, Finn?" "First, to get Juliana and the twins to safety." "No," Juliana said firmly, surprising both men. "I'm tired of running. Every time I run, they find me. It never ends." "This isn't about pride," Finnian argued. "It's about keeping you and the children alive." "I know that," Juliana replied, "but running hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to stand and fight." Thomas looked between them, then cleared his throat. "There might be another option. My freight wagon leaves for Helena tomorrow with a shipment of goods. Juliana and the twins could be hidden among the cargo. Once they're safely in Helena, we could deal with these men." "And how exactly would you deal with them?" Juliana demanded. "These men are killers. They murdered David in cold blood. They won't hesitate to kill you too." "We'll have the law on our side," Thomas insisted. "The law didn't help David," Juliana said bitterly. "And it won't help now, not without proof." Finnian had been quiet during this exchange, his eyes thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. "What if we could get proof?" "What kind of proof?" Thomas asked. "A confession." Finnian looked at Juliana. "If we could get one of them to admit to killing your husband, Sheriff Miller would have to arrest them." "And how do you propose to do that?" Juliana asked skeptically. "By giving them what they want, or at least making them think they're getting it." "The gold," Thomas realized. "You're talking about setting a trap." "Yes." Finnian turned to Juliana. "We spread the word that you've decided to talk, that you're going to lead them to the gold in exchange for being left alone." "They'll never believe that," Juliana objected. "They might if we make it convincing." Finnian leaned forward, his eyes intent. "We say that after David died, you found a map among his things. You've been hiding it, but now, with the twins to think about, you've decided it's not worth the risk anymore." "It's dangerous," Thomas warned. "If something goes wrong." "Everything about this situation is dangerous," Finnian countered. "At least this way we choose the ground and set the terms." Juliana considered the plan. It was risky, perhaps foolhardy, but the alternative, running again, always looking over her shoulder, never finding peace, was unbearable. "Where would this supposed gold be?" she asked finally. "There's an old abandoned mine about 10 miles from here," Finnian answered. "Remote enough to be believable, but close enough that we can control the situation." "We," Thomas repeated. "Finn, you can't face 3 armed men alone." "I won't be alone," Finnian replied. "I'll have you, Sheriff Miller, and a few others I trust, men who'll stand with us if I ask." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he nodded reluctantly. "When do you want to do this?" "Soon," Finnian decided. "Before they get impatient and decide to take matters into their own hands. Tomorrow night." After Thomas left to begin discreetly gathering their allies, Juliana found Finnian in the barn, saddling his horse. "Where are you going?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. "To check the mine, make sure it's suitable." He tightened the cinch, his movements efficient, and to think through the details of the plan. "Finnian." She rarely used his full name, and it caught his attention. He straightened, turning to face her. "This is too dangerous. These men have already killed once. They won't hesitate to kill again." "I know the risk," he said quietly, "but I also know that you and the twins deserve to live without fear. This may be our only chance to end this once and for all." "Why?" Juliana asked, the question that had been burning in her mind for weeks finally spilling out. "Why are you willing to risk your life for us? We're nothing to you, just strangers you took in out of kindness." Finnian was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Is that what you think?" "That you're nothing to me? I don't know what to think," Juliana admitted. "This began as an arrangement, a pretense." "Yes," Finnian agreed, "it did." "And now," Finnian took a step toward her, "now I find that I don't want it to be pretense anymore." The words hung in the air between them, changing everything. Juliana's heart beat faster, hope and fear mingling in her chest. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that I care for you, Juliana, for you and for the twins." Finnian's voice was low, sincere. "I know it's too soon. I know your heart still belongs to David. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to understand why I'm willing to take this risk." Juliana was speechless, overwhelmed by his confession and by the answering emotion she felt rising within her. "When Elizabeth and Mary died," Finnian continued, looking past her now as if seeing into the painful past, "I thought I would never want a family again. The risk of loss was too great. I closed myself off, focused on building the ranch, told myself it was enough." His eyes returned to her face. "And then you arrived with your courage and your twins and your determination to survive. And something inside me that I thought was dead forever started to live again." Juliana felt tears spring to her eyes. "I don't know what to say." You don't need to say anything, Finnian assured her. I just wanted you to know the truth before tomorrow, whatever happens. Without conscious thought, Juliana moved closer to him, raising one hand to touch his face. His beard was rough against her palm, but his eyes were soft as they met hers. I care for you too, she admitted quietly. I didn't expect to, and I've been fighting against it because it felt like a betrayal of David. But it's the truth. Finian's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. Juliana. She shook her head. No more words, not now, just come back safely tomorrow. Promise me. I promise, Finnian said solemnly, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. That night, after the twins were asleep, Juliana and Finnian sat together by the fire, discussing the details of the plan one final time. Thomas had returned with confirmation that Sheriff Miller and 4 other men had agreed to help. They would position themselves around the abandoned mine before Juliana arrived with the scarred man and his companions. Remember, Finnian instructed, your only job is to get them talking. Get them to admit what they did to David. Once they've confessed, we'll move in. And if something goes wrong, Juliana asked, if they realize it's a trap, then you run, Finnian said firmly. You get away as fast as you can and don't look back, and leave you there. I couldn't. You have to, Finnian insisted, taking her hands in his. The twins need you. Promise me you'll put them first no matter what. Juliana wanted to argue but knew he was right. Samuel and Sarah had to be her priority. I promise. They remained by the fire long into the night, hands intertwined, each lost in thoughts of what the next day might bring. When Juliana finally rose to go to bed, Finnian stood with her. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, know that these past weeks with you and the twins have been the happiest I've known in 5 years. Juliana felt tears threaten again but held them back. Instead, she reached up and gently kissed his cheek. Good night, Finnian. Good night, Juliana. The next morning, Thomas arrived early with word that the scarred man and his companions had taken the bait. They were expecting Juliana to meet them at the mine at sunset. Sheriff Miller and the others will be in position by late afternoon, Thomas reported. Everything's ready. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Juliana tended to the twins, played with them, fed them, all while a knot of fear tightened in her stomach with each passing hour. Finnian moved restlessly around the ranch, checking and rechecking his rifle and pistol, peering frequently out the windows as if expecting an early attack. At mid-afternoon, Mrs. Parker, a neighbor's wife who had agreed to watch the twins, arrived. Juliana hugged Samuel and Sarah fiercely before handing them over, whispering promises of return that she prayed she would be able to keep. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Juliana and Finnian mounted their horses and rode toward the mine. They would separate about a mile from the destination, Finnian to join the others in their hiding places, Juliana to continue alone as if coming from town. Remember, Finnian said as they reached the point where they would part ways, get them talking, then get clear. I remember, Juliana assured him, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Finnian reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. When this is over, when we're safe, we need to talk about the future. Our future, if you want that. I do, Juliana said softly. I want that very much. Finnian's face brightened with hope. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. I'll see you soon. Juliana watched him ride away, then turned her horse toward the mine. The sun was touching the mountain peaks now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She forced herself to move forward, one deliberate hoofbeat after another, toward what she hoped would be an end to running and a beginning of something new. The abandoned mine came into view as she rounded a bend in the trail, a dark opening in the hillside. a few rotting timbers marking what had once been an entranceway. 3 horses were tied to a stunted pine nearby, and 3 men stood waiting, the scarred man and 2 others, all armed, all watching her approach with predatory intensity. Juliana drew her horse to a halt about 20 feet away. She could feel her heart pounding but kept her expression calm, determined. "You came alone," the scarred man observed. "Smart." "I want this over with," Juliana replied, dismounting carefully. "I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder. Where's your husband?" One of the other men asked, his tone making the word a mockery. "At the ranch," Juliana answered. "He doesn't know I'm here, doesn't know about the map." "Show us," the scarred man demanded, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. Juliana reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper, a crude map Finnian had drawn, showing tunnels that didn't exist leading to a non-existent gold deposit. The scarred man snatched it from her, unfolding it eagerly. His companions crowded close, examining it over his shoulder. "How do we know this is real?" the third man asked suspiciously. "Could be leading us into a trap." "Why would I do that?" Juliana countered. "I just want to be left alone. I want my children to be safe." "Your husband's children, you mean," the scarred man said, watching her closely. "Lockhart's brats." "Yes," Juliana acknowledged, seeing her opening. "David's children, the children whose father you murdered." The scarred man's mouth curved in a cold smile. "He should have shared the gold when we asked. Would have been easier for everyone." "So you admit it?" Juliana pressed. "You killed him." "Course we killed him," one of the others said impatiently. "Shot him dead and would have done the same to you if you hadn't run off. Been tracking you ever since." "And now we've found you," the scarred man added. "Found you in the gold. So what happens now?" Juliana asked, taking a small step backward. "You kill me too, make my children orphans." "That's exactly what happens," the scarred man confirmed, drawing his pistol. "Can't leave witnesses, can we? But don't worry about those brats. They won't be orphans long. They'll be joining their parents." "You'd murder children." Juliana was genuinely horrified, though not entirely surprised. "Wouldn't be the first time," the third man said with a chuckle that chilled Juliana's blood. "That's enough." Sheriff Miller's voice rang out as he and the others emerged from their hiding places, rifles aimed. "Drop your weapons. You're under arrest for the murder of David Lockhart and for threatening Mrs. Foster and her children." For a moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man lunged toward Juliana, grabbing her arm and putting his pistol to her head. "Back off," he shouted. "Or she dies right now." Juliana could see Finnian among the men surrounding them, his face white with fear for her, his rifle aimed steadily at the scarred man. "Let her go," Sheriff Miller ordered. "You're outnumbered. There's nowhere to run." "Maybe not," the scarred man acknowledged, "but I can take her with me." His arm tightened around Juliana's throat. "Drop your guns or I'll kill her." Juliana met Finnian's eyes across the distance between them. She saw the anguish there, the indecision. Slowly he began to lower his rifle. "No," Juliana cried. "Don't." The scarred man's grip tightened, cutting off her words. "Shut up, all of you. Throw down your weapons, now." In the moment of distraction, Juliana made her move. She stomped hard on the scarred man's foot and simultaneously drove her elbow back into his stomach with all her strength. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to tear free and dive to the ground. A shot rang out, then another and another. Juliana covered her head with her arms, feeling dirt and pebbles raining down around her from bullets striking the earth. Then strong hands were pulling her up, dragging her to safety behind a large boulder. It was Finnian, his face grim as he pushed her down behind the rock. "Stay here," he ordered, then turned back toward the gunfight, rifle raised. The exchange of gunfire was brief but deafening. When it ended, Juliana peered cautiously around the boulder. 2 of the men lay motionless on the ground. The third, the scarred man, was on his knees, clutching a bleeding arm, Sheriff Miller standing over him with a pistol aimed at his head. "It's over," Finnian said, returning to Juliana and helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her throat burned where the scarred man had gripped her. "No, I'm all right. You did well," Finnian said, his voice rough with emotion. "Very well." Sheriff Miller approached, leading the scarred man with his hands bound behind his back. "We got a full confession," the sheriff said, satisfaction evident in his tone, "before and during. This one will hang for murder and good riddance. What about?" Juliana gestured toward the 2 still forms. "Dead," Miller confirmed. "Pulled on us when they should have surrendered." "Their choice." As Miller led the prisoner away, Finnian turned to Juliana, taking her hands in his. "It's truly over now," he said softly. "You're free. The twins are safe." "Thanks to you," Juliana replied. "All of you." "Let's go home," Finnian suggested, and the word home resonated in Juliana's heart with newfound meaning. They rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, side by side, the tension of the day gradually easing from their shoulders with each mile. Mrs. Parker greeted them at the door, the twins fed and content in her arms. Juliana took her children eagerly, holding them close, breathing in their sweet baby scent, thanking God for their safety and for the future that now stretched before them, a future without fear, without running after Mrs. Parker left. Juliana settled in a chair by the fire with the twins. Finnian moved about the house, lighting lamps against the darkness, stoking the fire, his presence a solid comfort in the room. Finally, he came to sit across from her, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he gazed at her and the babies. "You said we should talk about the future," Juliana reminded him softly, "when it was all over." "Yes," Finnian agreed. "I did. What kind of future did you have in mind?" Finnian leaned forward, his expression earnest. "One where this isn't pretense anymore. Where you're my wife in truth, not just in name. Where Samuel and Sarah are my children and perhaps someday we might have more." Juliana's heart swelled with emotion. "You'd want that?" "To be a father to another man's children." "They wouldn't be another man's children to me," Finnian said firmly. "They would be ours. Just as this house would be ours, this ranch, this life." "What about David?" Juliana asked, needing to be certain. "I loved him. A part of me always will." "I would never ask you to forget him," Finnian assured her. "He gave you these beautiful children. He will always be a part of your life, a part of their lives. I understand that." "And Elizabeth?" "Mary," a shadow of old grief crossed Finnian's face. "They will always be in my heart. But there's room there for new love, new joy. I've discovered that because of you." Juliana gazed down at the twins, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. Then she looked up at the man across from her, this man who had risked everything to protect her and her children, who had opened his home and his heart to them, who was offering them a future filled with love and security. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Finnian's face transformed with joy. He moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, one hand gently touching Samuel's dark hair, the other finding Juliana's cheek. "May I?" he whispered, his eyes on her lips. Juliana nodded, and Finnian leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle kiss, tender and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. When they parted, Juliana smiled through tears of happiness. "I thought I had lost everything," she murmured, "but instead I found a new beginning." "We all did," Finnian replied, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. "You, me, and these little ones." Samuel stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand grasping Finnian's finger with surprising strength. Finnian looked down at the baby, his expression one of wonder and love. "I've been waiting for a family," he said softly. waiting without even knowing I was waiting. And here you are." 2 weeks later, Juliana stood beside Finnian in the small church in Juniper Springs, exchanging vows that made official what was already true in their hearts. The twins, dressed in new clothes sewn by Mrs. Wilkins, were held by Thomas and Margaret Carlson, serving as godparents as well as witnesses. Sheriff Miller had sent word that the scarred man whose name they learned was Harlan Reeves had been tried and sentenced to hang for the murder of David Lockhart. The confession obtained during the confrontation at the mine had sealed his fate. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. As Juliana and Finnian walked out of the church as husband and wife in truth, the autumn sun breaking through clouds to bathe them in golden light, Juliana felt a sense of peace she had not known since before David's death. "Happy?" Finnian asked quietly, his hand warm around hers. "Yes," Juliana replied, looking up at him with a smile. "Very happy." They collected the twins from Margaret and climbed into the wagon that would take them home to the Diamond F, home to the life they were building together. A life that had begun in pretense, but had transformed into something real and precious. That evening, with the twins asleep in the nursery and the lamps turned low, Juliana and Finnian sat together on the porch, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "I never thought I would find love again," Juliana admitted, her head resting on Finnian's shoulder. "After David died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I felt the same after losing Elizabeth and Mary," Finnian replied, his arm tightening around her. "But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "Yes," Juliana agreed. "It certainly does." As they sat in comfortable silence, Juliana thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the fear, the running, and finally, the courage to stand and fight. She thought about the twins, who would grow up loved and secure on this beautiful ranch, with a father who had chosen them as his own. And she thought about Finnian, this good man who had opened his home and his heart when she had needed it most, who had risked everything to keep her and her children safe, who had waited for a family without knowing he was waiting. "I love you," she whispered, the words coming easily now, no longer feeling like a betrayal of what she had shared with David, but rather an honoring of life's capacity for renewal and hope. "And I love you," Finnian replied, bending to kiss her hair. "You and our children, always." In the nursery, the twins slept peacefully, safe at last. In the sky above, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And on the porch of the house that was now truly a home, Juliana and Finnian Foster held each other close, grateful for second chances and the unexpected joy of a family found when it was needed most.